In the late hours of March 18, 1990, at 1:24 a.m., two men made their way into the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, Massachusetts, and over the course of 81 minutes, the pair managed to subdue the guards, steal 13 works of art, and vanish completely without a trace. 29 years later, the paintings are still missing, and the heist is still talked about as if it were a Hollywood movie, where the bad guys won and left the police scratching their heads. With virtually no evidence left at the scene, and theories ranging from the Boston Mafia being involved to it being an inside job, with ideas spanning that the thieves were smart in some aspects and sloppy with the others, it is truly a mystery as to how they got away with it. Or did they? The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum was opened in 1903, owned and founded by art collector Isabella Stewart, described as a true patron of the arts with a respect for them that few could ever match. So much so that in her will, she decreed nothing in her museum should ever be removed or sold, nor should any other artworks be added to the collection, as she wanted the museum to remain exactly how it was the day she died. Staying true to Isabella's wishes, the museum never altered the layout of the art, a status that still remains true to this day. Yet, if you go tomorrow to visit, you would quickly notice there are several empty frames next to other art pieces, and no, that wouldn't be you seeing things. These empty frames would be the homes of the stolen artworks that were taken on the 18th of March, 1990. But how have these famous paintings, some labeled as priceless masterpieces, managed to stay in this state for going on 3 decades? Well, let me take you back to the night previously mentioned. Things were going as normal could be that night at the museum. The two guards, Rick Abbott and Randy Heston, were going about their routine routes with seemingly no threat in sight, and for both of them, they felt a sense of calm with the job, as they didn't think anyone would risk robbing an art museum. People rob banks after all, not art, a common thought amongst many who worked as security for the building. Unbeknownst to the two men, within a matter of 2 hours, one of the greatest heists in history would take place, and they were the only physical line of defense from that. Spoiler alert, they failed tremendously. It began at 12:52 a.m. when guard Rick Abbott was finishing up his patrol, but before returning to the front desk, he goes to a side door and quickly opens it before shutting it again. Completing his patrol, Abbott arrives at the front desk, where then Heston begins his rounds at precisely 1 a.m. 20 minutes later, a car pulls up to the side entrance of the museum, and two men in police uniforms exit the vehicle and approach the side door, where they ring the buzzer and ask to be let in as they are responding to a disturbance. And, since it is St. Patrick's Day, Abbott chalks it up to someone vandalizing the side of the building or attempting coming in from another entrance. Seeing that the two men were police officers, he buzzes them in, and at 1:24 a.m., they were let into the museum. Once inside, the police officers ask Abbott if anyone else was in the building, and if they were, to tell them to come down to the front desk. He complies and radios Heston to come down. While waiting, the two officers begin questioning Abbott and ask if he has any warrants because he looks familiar to them. They order him to come walk over to them. He nervously steps away from the front desk, where the only panic button is located. One of the two officers forces Abbott against a wall and handcuffs him. While this is occurring, Heston arrives, and in his confusion at the scene, was as well forced to a wall and handcuffed by the other officer. Enraged, both men demand to know what was going on, to which they were told by the officers that they were being robbed. After handcuffing the guards, the thieves informed the men that they knew who they were and where they lived, and if they complied, nobody would be hurt, and they would even be given a reward in about a year. After subduing the two guards in the basement, the thieves now had full access to the museum and quickly went to work. The time is now 1:35 a.m. Around 1:48 a.m., infrared motion detectors pick up steps in what was known as the Dutch Room, which houses some of the most valuable art pieces in the entire building. Setting off a security device that would go off in the instant someone gets too close to the art, it is quickly destroyed by the thieves, and shortly after, they take the Storm on the Sea of Galilee and A Lady and Gentleman in Black, both by famed artist Rembrandt. Not satisfied with these two near priceless works, the thieves also helped themselves to a self-portrait of Rembrandt as well. While one was busy using a box cutter and slicing out the painting from its frame, the other started working on removing Landscape with Obelisk by Flink. Shortly after that was taken, in the same crude manner as the others were, one of them focused on getting The Concert by Vermeer, but messed up in its removal as a large chunk from the upper portion of the painting was left in the frame. The final piece stolen from the Dutch Room was an ancient Chinese gu. Satisfied with their take, one of the thieves exited the area and made their way into an adjacent hallway. At 1:51 a.m., while the other was occupied putting the stolen loot together, the other began making his way into what is known as the Short Gallery. A few minutes later, the other joins him, and they end up taking a golden eagle finial from a Napoleonic flagpole, after they gave up struggling with taking the entire flag itself. Before exiting the hallway, the pair also took 5 sketches done by Edgar Degas from a cabinet door. At this point, they were having their hands full of artwork, but decided to make one final stop. At 2:01 a.m., the thieves make their way into what is known as the Blue Room on the first floor and take the Chez Tortoni by Edouard Manet, this being the final piece that would be stolen. This is one thing that was surprising to investigators, because it was one of the smallest paintings in the entire area, and you would think 2 inexperienced thieves in terms of art knowledge would go for larger paintings, but some argue the load they already had couldn't handle any other one of their size. At 2:11 a.m., the thieves checked in on the security guards to make sure they hadn't escaped, and if they were comfortable, and shortly after, they make their way to the security office and take the videos from the security cameras as well as the data printouts of the motion detectors, but they failed to remove the information from the hard drives, so that information was able to be salvaged. At approximately 2:40 a.m., the side entrance was opened, and it is assumed this is when the artwork was being loaded into the thieves' car. And by 2:45 a.m., the door was closed for the final time, and the thieves, presumably, get in their vehicle and leave. The time frame from first arriving to the museum to departing was 81 minutes, and in that very small window, $500 million worth of art was stolen and has never been seen since. For a fun fact, that much money in that little of time would be the equivalent of you working a job and every minute making $6.2 million for 81 minutes. So now that you know how the heist happened and what was taken, let's get into the aftermath and the speculation on who was behind one of the greatest robberies of all time. Very shortly after the heist occurred, the FBI took full control of the case. Assuming the paintings were going to cross state lines and possibly internationally, they worked fast to find leads to work with. The details on what was taken confused authorities and museum staff alike because the thieves didn't bother taking higher value pieces, some of which were near Mona Lisa level of importance. There were also several pieces that had attempted to be stolen, but it was clear the thieves gave up on, as one painting was seen with several of its screws missing, but most still being intact against the wall. The same thing happened with a Napoleonic flag. Not being able to take it, they settled for the Golden Eagle finial on top of it. This told authorities they were not dealing with expert art thieves, which led the FBI to taking looks at low-level thugs with possible ties to organized crime. Unfortunately, there was almost no physical evidence left at the museum, and after questioning the security guards, which proved to be of little to no help, the FBI were quickly finding leads drying up within a matter of hours of the crime. The only vague description given about the thieves was extremely basic, with little detail on any features of their faces. Working with what they had, police released this sketch of the thieves, with one being said to be around 5'9" and the other being around 6'1". The flag of suspicion rose to security guard Rick Abbott almost immediately, as his movements and recounting of that night were bizarre to say the least. As stated earlier, Abbott opened the side door for seemingly no reason at all, and after being questioned about this, he claimed he did it every night to make sure it was closed and locked. This, however, turned out to be a lie, as checking previous recordings from cameras showed Abbott had never once done this before the night of the heist. And interesting to note is that that side door was the same door the thieves entered in. Some have speculated that it could have been some kind of signal to the thieves outside. Combining that with the fact that Abbott was told to move away from the front desk where the only panic button was located as well throws credit to this idea that he played some part in the heist, as how else would they have known this was the only location of the panic button? One last thing about Abbott is that the night before the heist, it is shown on security cameras that he let in an unknown man into the building, and many have questioned if this was perhaps one of the thieves scoping out for the following night. But, in his defense, Abbott and several colleagues have all stated that man was the security chief of the museum. Rick Abbott has maintained his innocence and has never been charged with anything involved in this case. Suspicions were also rising at the idea of organized crime being behind the robbery, as Boston was known to have had a lot of issues with gangs in the area, and as well knowing the Boston mob was a big player in the city. Being behind major robberies, murders, kidnappings, and extortion, it's not difficult to say robbing an art museum would not be below them. While the FBI tracked down vague leads, they were able to theorize and build somewhat of a profile that the gang operated in Dorchester, a rough and violent place that was home to many criminals in the area at that time. Now, while I won't call it rocket science to name a place where crime is more common and say that's the location of where this all started, it is an important clue for later. Yet, after the profile leads dried up and most led to dead ends, all the FBI could hope for was either a break in the case or someone coming forward with information. And after a few years, that very thing happened. On April 29, 1994, a major lead came in the form of 2 letters, both being sent to Museum Director Anne Hawley. And in the first letter, it is stated that the writer was a negotiator and that they did not know the identity of the people behind the burglary. They went on to say that the reason for the theft was to reduce a prison sentence of an unnamed individual, but since that time had passed, they had no need for the art and wanted to sell it back to the museum for $2.6 million and immunity from prosecution. They also informed the director that the artworks were being kept in a different country and were safe. Other information that is not available to the public did state that the letter did include things that only the museum, FBI, and thieves would have known, so the letter was taken very seriously, and Hawley, with the permission from authorities, agreed to the sale. A few days later, on May 5th, 1994, the second letter was sent, with the writer pleased with the agreement, but also expressed major concern for the involvement of the FBI and local authorities to determine the identity of the writer and those involved, stating that they needed time to figure out their next move. That was the last thing Hawley ever heard from the writer. Since then, no other letters have been sent. The case remained in this stagnant state until around 1997, when after little progress had been made with the method that they had been doing, the museum and FBI resorted to reaching out to the public for any information leading to the suspects and artwork, and to encourage anyone out there, a reward of $5 million was offered to information leading to the latter. Being such a large reward, the public flooded tip lines with information, yet no leads were ever concrete and many were outright ridiculous, naming gangsters who had been dead for 20 years or giving off speculation that aliens had something to do with this. The only angle the FBI could lean to was organized crime, as they thought it would be next to impossible that a random thug or small gang could pull off this heist and remain undetected for this long. With the connections that the mob had, it isn't hard to see how they could manage to do this and leave no trace behind. Because of this, many gangsters were surveyed, including Whitey Bulger, a big-time player in the criminal scene and leader of the Winter Hill Gang. No evidence was found after months of watching the infamous crime boss, though. Another was conman Brian McDevitt, who in 1981 attempted to rob a different art museum but failed, even going as far as to acquiring disguises just like the thieves in the Gardner heist did. So the parallels were there, but after running his fingerprints to the scene, it was not a match. While authorities watched and questioned other criminals in the area, the FBI had their eyes on one man who up until then was not on many people's radar. But to the FBI, they knew of his past and had actually been watching him for years. That man was Carmelo Merlino, who seems to be at the center of every theory that surrounds this case. Merlino was largely speculated to be the mastermind of the entire operation when he learned 9 years earlier in 1981 of how easy it would be to rob the museum because of its lack in security and it being extremely close to an auto shop in which Merlino operated, and the location of that auto shop was in Dorchester. As I mentioned earlier, this is an important clue. Many of Merlino's known associates and family began being surveyed, and while most didn't share any information about the heist, there were two names that started undoing the glue that held this mystery together. Which leads us to the two Bobbies, Robert Guarente and Robert Gentile, both of whom were associates of Merlino's. Credit was given to this idea when in 2010, Guarente's wife told the FBI that before his death in 2004, he had given the stolen artworks to Gentile, and as to nobody's surprise, Gentile denied these accusations and claimed to have never seen the stolen paintings. Being given a polygraph test and failing, Gentile denied he was lying, and was even given a retest where he then told that Guarente's widow showed him the stolen Rembrandt self-portrait, and these results indicated that he was telling the truth. But shortly thereafter, he refused to cooperate with authorities anymore. Because of his results showing that he was telling the truth, the FBI got a warrant and raided his home. And during the raid of his home, they discovered a secret room hidden under the floor in an outdoor shed. And what did the FBI find in this secret hidden room of a man loosely connected to the biggest heist in American history? Nothing. It was completely empty, with the exception of a newspaper reporting the heist from back in 1990, along with a small piece of paper that showed what types of stolen paintings would sell for on the black market. Discovering from his son that a few years prior, the small room flooded, and while not knowing the contents of what was in it, Gentile's son described his dad being extremely upset about what was stored in there. Gentile has stated that he cannot remember what was stored in there, but I would take that with an extremely large grain of salt. Even after that, I am still not done talking about Carmelo Merlino. Shortly after the fiasco with Gentile in 2010, after years of working undercover, following leads, and handling the pressure of media for progress, in 2013, the FBI announced they knew who were responsible for the actual heist. The original two guys that started this whole thing. Their identities didn't remain a secret for too long, as in 2015 they were named, and the two men were George Reisfelder and Lenny DiMuzio. Two low-level thugs who worked for none other than Merlino, were hired to perform the heist, which would explain the carelessness the two had with the art. The descriptions, while vague, did match, and both were out of prison at the time of the heist. They fell under the radar because both died within a year of the events taking place. Reisfelder from a drug overdose, and DiMuzio was murdered following a failed attempt at overthrowing Merlino. Many believe that DiMuzio felt, because of the success of the heist, that he deserves a higher role in future endeavors, but being that he was still a very low level, it didn't warrant his wanted promotion, which led to his revolt, and in turn, his death. Reisfelder, on the other hand, was a career criminal who was frequently in and out of jail, and both seemed to be the perfect choice, as if they were caught, they held no ties to Merlino, and if they were successful, given their status, they could easily be removed off, which is a strong theory as to what happened to both men. So now that we know who was behind the heist, the only question left is where exactly is the art that was stolen? This leads me to tell you about a man named Bobby Donati, who was speculated to have been involved, and his involvement actually raises more questions than answers. Donati was said to have been a participant of the heist, and instead of 2, it was in fact 5 men, but only 2 actually went into the museum that night. And Donati helped transfer the paintings to a storage unit in Philadelphia, and then it was later moved to Brooklyn. Yet, there are other reports that claim he was one of the thieves. The point of why I am even talking about him though is because of the rumors that the paintings were being held in a storage unit caught the interest of journalist Tom Mashberg, and after digging, found that an antique dealer named William Youngworth knew the exact location of that storage unit and agreed to take Mashberg there. That night in August of 1997, the two went to a storage complex in Brooklyn, and Mashberg was shown with a flashlight what appeared to be the storm on the Sea of Galilee. And to give proof that it was in fact the real thing, Mashberg was given a small vial of paint chips, and after examination, it turned out to be a perfect match to one of the stolen paintings. But it wasn't the storm on the sea. Instead, it was a perfect match to the concert, which in itself raises even more questions, as why was he given paint chips from a separate painting altogether? Yet this lead is still the strongest lead to this day on the missing artworks. But where are the paintings? These priceless masterpieces are still missing after nearly 3 decades. That is the question that everyone wants answered, and nobody knows. Almost all tied to or speculated to be involved in the heist are dead. All the research I have found are a mix of credible and others useless. Some is valuable information, and while some seem to hold their weight, it is quickly thrown out due to certain aspects not being possible. Such as when Mashberg was supposedly shown the storm on the sea. While credible, especially with the paint chips matching a different painting, the fact that he said he saw the painting rolled in a cylinder is impossible, because you can't roll antique oil paintings like that. Think of it as trying to roll a piece of cardboard. Can it technically be done? Yes, but it wouldn't fit in a cylindrical tube. And Lord forbid if it did, then the painting would be practically destroyed. And that is just one example I came across. What many at this point, 30 years later, are convinced of is that Merlino orchestrated the heist, hired Reisfelder and DiMuzio, and somehow they managed to pull it off, with possible help from Abbott. Merlino was acting on the order of someone higher to which we don't know, and that the paintings are and have been out of the country, being used as a means of payment between higher power criminals instead of normal money. Think of it in terms of a crime movie, where one kingpin gives another an exotic animal or rare car. Same thing with irreplaceable art. And it is truly a tragedy, only being able to see these works of art online now instead of in person. And while it may not seem like a big deal to many out there, imagine, if you will, finding out tomorrow that someone stole the Eiffel Tower or Statue of Liberty. Of course, I am exaggerating to this, to an extent, because you can't physically steal either of those. But imagine never being able to see them again in person, and you may begin to understand the reality of this crime and how ultimately, in a way, the bad guys won here. Yes, the FBI solved who were behind it, but without actually having the art back in their rightful place, the case is and will remain only half solved. I hope you enjoyed this case. It's always interesting to hear about a heist, especially one that managed to actually be pulled off, and this case alone has generated an enormous amount of speculation. I had no idea I would have this much information to cover, and I didn't even go over every single person that I read about because I felt their connections did not play any serious parts. That and this script is already 12 pages long. I had no idea the amount of people that have been speculated on and considered as suspects, some having nothing to do with the heist other than having ties, whether big or small, to the mob. The sheer coverage and magnitude this case has created has been seen throughout the years as news agencies continue covering it, whether it was talking about a new clue or revisiting the story to keep the public from forgetting about it. And speaking of magnitude, if you need any other example of how big this case was, in 2010 it received its greatest acknowledgement yet, because it was referenced in The Simpsons. If you enjoyed this video, then consider checking back in because I plan on having a new video out in about a week, and it's a case I am very excited about because I haven't seen anyone else cover this one. With that being said, I thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one. This is Cadaver, signing off.